right, it's already a little late. Okay. Okay. Good Chodesh, a second day, and today's daf is daf Lamed Daled, and we pick up, and we're actually at the top of Lamed Daled. Let me refresh what we said at the end of yesterday, and just tell you also what Tosfos adds to make it a little more understandable. The Gemara had been dealing with the whole issue about where is your Eruv, and is it in a place that you could get to it during Bein Hashmashos? And it then sort of went from the simple question of getting to it to, well, let's say there's only a rabbinic problem. Well, according to Rabbi, you can do D'Rabbanan Bein Hashmashos, and therefore that's considered accessible. But then, well, if it's in Rosh Yachid and you're in Rosh Rabbim, it's no good. But then it created these like virtual realities. So one virtual reality is everything within 4 amot is like it's all together and it's like it's in the same Rosh, and it had to create a scenario where the Eruv was more than 4 amos away from you. Then the other issue that came up was, the Gemara sort of spoke about the fact that, well, maybe you can sort of take it in stages, take it from the Rosh Yachid, put it into a Carmelist, like the arm of the tree, and from the Carmelist, if that was a Carmelist, take it to you into a Rosh Rabbim. A lot of what-ifs and what-ifs, And then the last sort of thing that the Gemara dealt with was the if it was in a basket, which was in Rosh Yachid and you're in Rosh Rabbim, well, you could tip the basket, and it could go in the basket, go lower in the basket, and then the basket, the bottom of the basket would be a Carmelist, and then from there you would take it to where you are in Rosh Hashanah. So after all of those, well, you could in theory do this and in theory do that, the Gemara finally, as it were, threw up its hands and said, then, that's the way I'm describing it, why do you ever have to take the Eruv out to anywhere? You could just say, well, in theory, I'm planning a starting Shabbos 2,000 amos outside of the city, my Eruv's in my house, but in theory, I could take my Eruv to my, to where I wanted it to be. If it doesn't have to be right in the same space, and in theory, I could take it. So the Gemara's answer was, this is the way Rashi understands, I'll tell you what Tosfos says in a minute to make it a little bit more of a reasonable question. And the Gemara's answer is, well, in principle, you're right. You really shouldn't ever have to take your Eruv out anywhere. But in the case where you wanted to put an Eruv on Yontiv after Shabbos, Yontiv on a Sunday, there would have been no way to get your Eruv where it needs to be on Shabbos, for the Sunday, because you couldn't move it on the Shabbos. So for that one case, we demand that you always put your Eruv out in the right place. So that's a little crazy. That means that the only reason you ever have to lay your Eruv is for the one case of a Yontiv after Shabbos. So Tosfos makes a point which makes it the Gemara's question and answer a little more understandable. Tosfos says, I don't understand the way Rashi read the Gemara. In a normal case of an Eruv on Friday, you can't say, well, in theory, I could bring it to 2,000 amos outside the city. Because when does the Eruv take effect? It takes effect on Bein Hashmashos. So the question is it accessible to me? Is a question of, is it accessible Bein Hashmashos? So Bein Hashmashos, if I'm 2,000 amos outside of the city, and the Eruv's in my house, I can't bring it to me. First of all, it'll take more time than exists during Bein Hashmashos. Bein Hashmashos will be over in 10 minutes. Number one. Number two, I can't carry, That's a Doraisa carrying. It's not a D'Rabbanan. Even Rabbi only allows D'Rabbanans. So that, says Tosfos, was never the question. We always understood why you had to actually lay it on a Friday where it's supposed to be, because there's no way you can carry it during the Bein Hashmashos period. If, they'll be carrying in Rosh Hashanah and so on. So Tosfos says the only question was, why do you need to lay the Eruv on Yontif? If you want to put an Eruv, let's say, let's say Yontif is on a Wednesday, and you wanted to lay the Eruv on Tuesday for Wednesday Yontif, why do you need to do that? Even if it was Bein Hashmashos about to be Yontif, you could carry the Eruv from wherever it is. So that was the only question. Why do you need to lay in a Yontiv Eruv? The Eruv could be in your house, but in theory, in Bein Hashmashos, I could always have carried it, because there's no problem of carrying. So now, that question already makes sense. Yontiv, why do I need an Eruv? And the answer is, the only reason you need an Eruv for Yontiv to actually put it somewhere is when Shabbos precedes Yontiv. When Yontiv is a Sunday, and then Shabbos, and therefore there's no way you could have carried it to where it needs to be by Saturday night. Okay? So that's the Gemara's question and answer according to Tosfos. And again, it's sort of like the Gemara saying, how far are you going to take this what if? Well, in theory, I could tip the basket. All right, in theory, I'll read it Tosfos ways, you could bring your Eruv out to wherever it needs to be, Erev Yontif, Beinish Mashas Yontif, because you can carry. So he says, yeah, you're basically right, but it's to cover the case of Shabbos before Yontif. Okay, now we move on. So I'll just reread the answer, 3 lines from the top on Lamed Aleph, Lamed Aleph. Amar Rabbi Zera, Gzeira Mishum Yontif Shechal Yosachar Shabbos. Yeah, the only reason you need to lay an Eruv, actually put it there for a Yontif, is for the case where Shabbos precedes Yontif. Okay, Esvei. Now I'll ask you on this idea of the whole sort of basket idea, and in theory you can move it and so on. Niskavin lishpos berishus harabim v'niach eruva bekotel. So it's a similar case. You wanted to start your Shabbos in the rishus harabim, and instead of putting your eruv in the tree, which was a rishus hayachid, you put it on a wall. Okay, so if it is lamata me'asar tvachim, it's a low wall and it's lower than 10 tvachim eruv. Obviously, it's good. You're in a rishus harabim, and the eruv is in either rishus harabim or a carmelist. But anyway, according to Rabbi, fine. That's all okay. If you put it in a wall and it's lower than 10 tvachim. If, however, the wall is higher than 10 tvachim, and we also assume 4 by 4 tvachim wide, then it's not good. This is straight what we taught before. The eruv is in rishus hayachid. You're in rishus harabim. No good. Fine. That's just like the tree situation. Now, another case. Niskavin lishpos barosha shovach o barosha migdal. Let's say you wanted to start Shabbos not on the ground. You wanted to start Shabbos on the roof of a chicken coop, or on the roof or on the roof of a tower. Now, a tower, as we'll see, often does not mean like a castle tower. It often actually meant like some type of a wooden tower, which often was even portable. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what they used it for. Yeah, I don't know. It could even have been like almost like a chest of drawers, if you think about it, which was like 10 tefachim high or so on. Okay, but migdal can mean different things in terms of how permanent of a structure it is. You'll see why I'm saying this in a minute. Anyway, so l'mala mi'asar tefachim eruv eruv, l'mata mi'asar tefachim ein eruv eruv. Now, Rashi has 2 explanations. You see, not only are there a lot of Tosfos on this stuff, there's a lot of Rashi. I'll give you the second explanation of Rashi, which is the easier one. Here's the street, which is a rishus harabim. Here's your little, tower, and now you're not physically there, by the way. If you're physically there, like we said before, then you don't even need an eruv. Okay, but here you are in the Here you are in where you want to start. This is your shovach, your chicken coop, or your migdal, and here's a wall that runs right next to. Trying to draw like 3 dimensions. Okay. Anyway, here's a wall that runs right alongside. Okay. So if the wall is 10 tefachim, this is 10 tefachim, this is a rishus hayachid, and if the wall is 10 tefachim high, it's a rishus hayachid, and if your eruv is here, then in theory, assuming that these are above against one another, there's no rishus harabim that goes in between, because then you get into problems of one rishus hayachid to another over rishus harabim, then your eruv, you can take it from rishus hayachid to rishus hayachid, no problem, it works. Now the question is, why doesn't it work if it's lower than 10 tefachim? If it's lower than 10 tefachim, you're in rishus hayachid, this would be what? A carmelist? So it still would be like a rabbinic problem, but rabbinic problems maybe are okay according to Rabbi. So there are 2 answers. One answer is, if the wall is low and usable by the people in the rishus harabim, the wall becomes part of the rishus harabim. We had that yesterday. A 9 tefach wall that's usable would be a rishus harabim. The other answer that Rashi gives is Rashi says this isn't considered the same space, even though halachically you could access it. The idea is that the airspace of rishus harabim goes up to 10 tefachim. So anything higher than 10 tefachim is in the same sort of conceptual space, forgetting halachic issues of accessibility. And if it's lower, is in the same. But if you're higher than 10 and it's lower than 10, then it actually is considered to be in a different space. Okay, that's at least the way Rashi explains it. Question if that really works in other Gemaras.
Is it considered to be in the Rishus Harabim or not?
It doesn't matter for this purpose. You and your eruv are not considered to be b'makom echad, even if it's physically and halachically accessible. That's the way Rashi explains it, but it doesn't fit with all the Gemaras that seem to not always be bothered by that idea. But anyway, that's the halacha here. Okay, so let's read that again. Niskavin lishbos barosha shovach o barosha migdal. If you wanted to start Shabbos at the top of this chicken coop or tower, l'malam esar tefachim. If the Eruv was higher than 10 tefachim on the wall is higher than 10 tefachim, and it's right alongside. Eruv, it's good. It's accessible. It's one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah. Halachically accessible, physically accessible. L'matam esar tefachim ein Eruv. Lower, it's not, because as I said, either that would make it from a Rosh Hashanah to a Rosh Hashanah if the wall becomes part of the Rosh Hashanah, or because of Rashi's idea that it's just considered to be a different space. Okay? So, now the Gemara says, like this, V'amai, so if you're doing in theory you could tip the basket, why is this a problem? Hachanami Nema, what can you tip here? What, you're going to tip a wall? So here's what Gemara's strange suggestion. Why don't we say, Hov yochol lintoso ulavio litoch asara? So the Gemara says, why don't we say that yes, you actually could tip the Migdal, you could tip the tower, because again, the Gemara assumes, although it says tower, makes us think of a big thing, the Gemara often assumes that a tower is made out, means a wooden thing. Maybe it's like even able to think about it almost like, as I said, like a chest of drawers, or maybe here, that would be a good example, like a filing cabinet. Something like that would be called a Migdal, okay? You got this big filing cabinet, or, dresser, not dresser, what's it called? A wardrobe, like that would be like a Migdal. So the Gemara says, I don't get it. Even if it's lower than 10 tefachim, why don't I just say, in theory, I could tip this over, right? And if I tip that over, then it would be lower than 10 tefachim, and it would be going like from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So how far are you going to take this in theory? Since yesterday we said that even when the Eruv was in a Rosh Hashanah in the basket, you could tip the basket over and bring it into a Carmelis. Fine. So this is the same thing. You're on a Rosh Hashanah, but you could tip your wardrobe over and put yourself into a Carmelis or Rosh Hashanah. So why should it be a problem? What? Well, okay, you're not physically there. Okay, you're just saying you're starting Shabbos there. Okay, so that's the Gemara's question. Again, I'm just drawing the person. If you actually were there, you wouldn't need an Erev, just to show you where you're intending to start Shabbos. Okay, so the Gemara is basically trying to, take the reductio ad absurdum of how far you're going to say in theory you could tip and reconfigure things. So the Gemara says, I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah, said Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hacha b'migdal misumar askinan. What do I call it? The wardrobe is nailed into the ground. Okay, so you can't tip it over. That's why. It's a particular scenario where physically you can't tip over the wardrobe. Okay, Rava would say, even if it's not nailed in, it's a tall one. So therefore what? If you move it a little bit and you tip it over, then you're going to wind up, right? If you tip it over, right, then you're going to wind up outside of, it's not just 10 tefachim high, of course, you're going to wind up outside of 4 amot. And if you're outside of 4 amot, then what? Then number one, you can't bring the Eruv to you, because that's 4 amot in Rishut Harabim. Mm-hmm. And number two, says Rashi, now of course there's questions about maybe you can make a lot of little trips, maybe you could still do it with Rabbanans. But Rashi also says, you're 4 amot away, you intended to start Shabbos here. And if you imagine, well, in theory, if I virtually tipped it over, yes, but then you'd be starting Shabbos 4 amos away from where you intended to start Shabbos. So you would not be in the same place you had defined where your beginning of Shabbos would be. Now remember we said you have 4 amot in all directions, but if you had intended to start Shabbos right near the wall, and the only way the Eruv is considered accessible is by imagining you tipped it over, then in practice you're saying that you have to be starting Shabbos 4 amos away from the wall. Okay? So the Gemara's answer is, look, in some scenarios, the idea that you could tip it over might work, but here, for whatever reason, physically you can't tip it over. If you tipped it over, you'd be too far away. But yes, we're willing to say that in theory you could tip it over. Okay? So the Gemara now keeps on going and saying, if you did this in theory, I'll give you another what if, or another in theory. So the Gemara says, hey Chidami, 1 minute, what's the case? Itika kavso masna, if there's a window and a rope, so leisi b'kavso masa, why don't you just pull it with the window, through the window with the rope? So the Gemara says, fine, you don't have a window and a rope. So the Gemara's basic point here is, I don't get it, says the Gemara. So don't tip it over, but I'll give you another what if. Not a what if that you'll tip it over. A what if? Why don't you sort of what if you had a rope tied around here, and it's a little unclear why it says a window. Maybe it sort of imagines you're not literally on top. You're here and you're doing it through a window. There's other ways in which Tosfos reads that. But basically, if you had a rope, why don't we say in theory you could bring it to you that way? Now, of course, the question is, why does the rope make it better? Right? You're still taking it from, you're in Rosh Hashanah, and you're taking it from lower than 10 tefachim. How does the rope improve the situation? So one of the answers is that if you had a rope attached to it, then it would not be considered, we had this whole discussion in Shabbos about Eged Kli. If you have something, if you're here in your Rosh Hashanah, your house, okay, I know that's not right, and you have a basket that goes from your house into the Rosh Hashanah, and part of it is in your house and part is in the Rosh Hashanah, that's not considered having carried because part of it remains with you. So here too, if you had a rope attached to it, it would already be considered partly out, and therefore moving it fully into one Rishus would not be a biblical violation because it already would have been considered partly in that other Rishus. Anyway, it's another scenario where the Gemara says a what if to make things work, and again, the Gemara is not willing to give up on its whole what-if answer, or in theory, and says it's a special case, or it's a case where you can't say this. So again, the basic point is, yesterday the Gemara says, even if it's in a basket in Rosh Hashanah, it's considered accessible because you could reconfigure it and tip it and turn it into a carmelis. So the Gemara says, if that's true, you could always reconfigure things. You could tip over your tower and make it into a carmelis or Rosh Hashanah. You could in theory, have a rope attached to your Eiruvin and be able to access it that way. And the Gemara's answer is, yeah, you're right. If you could do those things, it would work, but we're talking that you don't have a rope, or we're talking that your tower is nailed down, or your tower is very tall, so if you tipped it over, it would not be good. But in theory, you would say this what if. Okay, so that becomes a very broad definition of accessible in theory, even if you would change the configuration. Now, thankfully, we move on. Okay. Nosno bebor a few amok mea ama. If you put it in a well, even 100 amos deep, it's okay. So Gemara says, "Hi bor dekai heicha." This is going back to the Mishnah. Where is this well? Ilema dekai b'rishus hayachid. If it's in a private domain, meaning the area around it is a rishus hayachid, pshita. Of course. You're in a Rosh Hashanah, right? The area above the well is a Rosh Hashanah, and the Eruv is in the bottom of the well in a Rosh Hashanah. So, of course it's good. Rosh Hashanah, the same way Rosh Hashanah goes up to the heaven. The same way it goes up. It goes down. So obviously it's a funny way of framing it. The board itself is a Rosh Hashanah, but anyway, it says, of course, you and the Eruv are in one place. It's accessible. What's the Chiddush? The Ella the Kaibrish is a Rabbim. Let's say the area around the well is a Rosh Hashanah. But the well, because it's 10 tefachim deep, is a Rosh Hashanah. So diniskavin lishbros heicha. Where are you planning on starting your Shabbos? Ilamala, if you're planning on starting your Shabbos on the ground above the well, so we got a problem. Then you're in one place, Rosh Hashanah, and the Erev is in another. It's at the bottom of the well, which is Rosh Hashanah, and there's no way you can get to it on Shabbos. Ella ilamata, and if you are at the bottom of the well, not physically, but you're planning on starting Shabbos at the bottom of the well, pshita, then of course it's good. You're right there with your Eruv in a Rosh Hashanah. So what's the issue? So again, what's this whole chiddush about the well? Either it shouldn't work because you're in Rosh Hashanah and it's Rosh Hashanah, or it's obvious. So the Gemara says, lo tzricha, you need it for the case, the kai bekarmelis, that the area around the well is a carmelis, and the well itself, the bottom of the well, is a Rosh Hashanah. And you wanted to start Shabbos reasonably above the well. So now you're in a carmelis, and your Eruv is in a Rosh Hashanah, it's at the bottom of the well. So you might think that's no good, because rabbinically you can't do that. So again, we go back to what we're saying. The Rabbi, this is the position of Rabbi, the Amar, Kol Davar Shehu Mishum Shvus, Lo Gozra Lav Ben Hashmashos. Anything that's rabbinic does not apply Ben Hashmashos, and therefore, like we've taught before, it's considered accessible, even though it's in a Rosh Hashanah, and you're in a carmelis. Okay, so that was just a simple end to the last station of the Mishnah of the well. But again, the point being that the Erev has has to be considered accessible. Accessible means even halachically accessible. And Rabbi, however, is not bothered that it's only a rabbinic restriction. You could have said that Rabbi's position is a halach in Eruv, that it's still considered accessible, but the Gemara broadens Rabbi with significant halachic implications to say that really Rabbi would allow you to do D'Rabbanans during the Bein Hashmashos period. And then the thing that we spent a lot of time discussing was what are cases that you could get to with only doing a D'Rabbanan, and how do you describe what does it mean in theory you could get to it? How much do you sort of do the what if and in theory, and that was what a lot of the Amud Aleph was talking about. Would you go so far to say I could change the configuration, I could tip it over, and so on. Okay, now we move on to the next Mishnah, which is a similar application of the previous discussion. Let's take a look. Nosno berosh hakaneh, o berosh hakundis. If you put the Eruv at the top of a long pole, okay, so the pole isn't a Rishus HaYachid, it's just a pole. It's sticking in the ground, and it's a tall pole, and you put it at the top of it. Bismanshu tarish v'notes. If it's not a type of a reed that's growing from the ground, because kaneh can mean a reed, then if it was a reed, it would be a problem of using something attached to the ground. But if it's basically like something that's been detached and is stuck into the ground, it's a pole. So there's no problem of using it. Even 100 amos tall, it's high, it's an Eruv. Now I should say that that's a little funny, because how can you get to it? Right? Forget halachic issues, it's 100 amos. And the Gemara doesn't really discuss that. In theory, you might have to say, well, in theory, I don't know, you could shake the pole, or something like that, as long as there's not a halachic problem with it. But by the way, this does indicate the problem that I mentioned to you about Rashi's, the position of higher than 10 tefachim is never considered the same zone, right? This Mishnah seems to go against that, because presumably you're on the street of Rosh Hashanah, it's on the top of a flagpole, so halachically it's accessible, but it's still higher than 10 tefachim. Right, it's at the top of a flagpole. So anyway, this indicates that would not be a problem. Okay, so it's at the top of a flagpole, no problem, even if it's very high. In theory, maybe you could shake the flagpole and get to it, no issue. Fine. Let's see what the Gemara says. Rami Ravada Bar Masna LeRava. So Ravada Bar Masna asked Rava, challenged him. Tolish v'notes in, the Mishnah says it's only good if it's on top of the flagpole. If the flagpole has been something that was cut down, not like growing from the ground, it's a reed, and then you stuck it back in. Low tolish v'notes, if that was not the scenario, no. If it was just on top of like a tall reed that's growing from the ground, it would not be good. Money, so who would have a problem if you put it on something growing from the ground? Rabbanim, it's the rabbis who argue on Revi, that rabbinic restrictions are a problem in Hashmashos, and therefore they don't want it to be on a tree or on a reed, because then it would not be accessible, because that's a rabbinic problem. But the Gemara says, 1 minute. What was the whole first Mishnah? The whole first Mishnah was you put it on what? On a tree. Okay? So how come this Mishnah says it can't be growing from the ground? If the first Mishnah said you could put it on a tree. V'amarta Reisha, you said the first Mishnah was Rabbi. The first Mishnah explicitly had you putting it on a tree. So the Gemara says, Reisha, Rabbi, Sefer Rabbanan? Could the beginning be, the first part be Rabbi and say you can use a tree? And the end be the Rabbanan that say, no, you can't? So the Gemara says, so he said back to him, so Rabbi said back to him, Rami Bachama Rav Chisda, you're not the first one to think of that question. Rami Bachama already asked Rav Chisda this problem. Rami often threw two Tanaic sources against one another, like show the contradiction of these sources. And he answered him, yeah, Reisha Rebbe, Sefer Rabbanan. Okay, new. So yes, the first one goes like Rebbe, that you can use a tree, and the end is Rabbanan. Now, for us, that might seem like a very weak answer, but actually, it might, historically, that might really be the answer, because if we remind ourselves that the Mishnayot were not written by Rebbe, the Mishnayot were what? By Rebbe. They were collated and redacted and edited by Rabbi, so it's coming from a lot of different sources. So yeah, maybe one Mishnah was from the school, it's Rabbi himself, but from the school that says you can put an Eruv on Mechubel Karka, and the fact that rabbinically you can't use trees on Shabbos doesn't prevent it from being a good Eruv, because it's Bein Hashmashos and the whole thing. And the second source was from a school that said that wouldn't work. Yeah, so fine, the two Mishnayos are not from the same school. Okay. Ravina Amar Kula Rebbe. You know what? It's all Rebbe. And Rebbe allows you to put it on a tree, but he wouldn't allow you to put it on a reed. Why not? V'shani le reisha, I'm sorry, Kula Rebbe, v'seifa gzeir shemi yiktom. The end is a problem. We're afraid that you'll come to cut it, to pick it out of the ground, which means, although Rebbe says you can do rabbinic restrictions bein hashmashos, he doesn't allow every rabbinic restriction. There are some things that are much more likely to lead to a d'oraisa problem that even Rebbe would have to forbid. So here, don't put your Eruv on something like essentially it's like a, I don't know, it's hard for me even to imagine what type of a reed is sturdy enough to support the weight of an Eruv, but I don't know. Or maybe it's, that's interesting, could be bamboo. Or maybe it's like if you imagine like corn stalks or something, and it was a light thing and you put on the top of a corn stalk, something like that. So there, Rebbe is saying there, it's not just a rabbinic restriction of don't use things wrong on the ground. The reality is if we let you do that, there's a good chance you'll come to break off a piece of corn, break off a leaf, and therefore that I won't go so far to allow that case. So the reed case is different than the tree case. Okay, so that's problem solved number one, why it says it can't be mechuber l'karka if until now we were talking about putting them in trees. Now, the Gemara has a story. Hahuf pulmusa, a certain army troops. Now, pulmus make you sound of a certain English word derived from the Latin of polemic. Okay, which means basically an argument, which comes from because pulmus meant troops or an army. Okay, so or it has to do with war and army and so on. So a certain army troops, the Asal in Naharda, came to Naharda, and they basically were being quartered in Naharda. Okay, and they didn't have the constitution that they wouldn't have to quarter troops. So, and then there was a problem about where all of this was on Shabbos, where all of the students were going to go. We had this once before, that they needed place for the students. They cleared out a warehouse. They went to the yards. They went to the fields. So this is often we see the scenario where students would get together with their Rebbe to learn on Shabbos, and sometimes they wouldn't have enough space. So here they didn't have enough space because of these army troops that were quartered. So Amaru Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman said to them being presumably his students, Puku avidu kvushi kavshi ba'agma. Today, which was Erev Shabbos, go out and lay flat some of the reeds in that swampy area over there. It wasn't too swampy. But maybe we're going to have to go sit out over there in the field on Shabbos. Okay? I want you to do is flatten, let's say this way, flatten some of the corn stalks so you'll have a place to sit on Shabbos. Okay? And that's where we're going to do our learning on Shabbos. Tomorrow on Shabbos, we'll go and we'll sit on it. Esvei Rami Bar Chama Rav Nachman. So Rami Bar Chama challenged Rav Nachman, who was saying that this is what we should do. The Amile Rav Ukva Bar Aval Rav Nachman. Some say Rav Ukva challenged Rav Nachman. Tolish v'notes in, lo tolish v'lo notes lo. So our Mishnah says that if it's been plucked out and pushed back in, yes, it's okay to put your Eruv, but not. So what does that mean? So this is, although a second ago we said that the stalks might be more strict than the tree, okay, right, and that even Rebbe, who doesn't mind the tree, would mind the stalks. Here, it sounds that they're bothered with, I don't understand it. Even if you bend down the corn, let's say we're talking about that, the corn stalks, how can you sit on the corn stalks? You're not pulling them out of the ground. You'll still be sitting on the corn stalks, bent over, that are attached to the ground. That should be like using something growing from the ground, like sitting on a tree, which you're not allowed to do. And you see in the Mishnah that the stalks are just like the tree, because it says you can't have your Erev on a stalk. So again, a minute ago we said the stalks are even worse than the tree. But here, Rav Nachman seemed to not be bothered by using stalks on Shabbos and sitting on stalks. So they said, why are you not bothered by sitting on stalks on Shabbos? That should be as bad as using a tree. So let's see what the Gemara's answer is. Amar Lei, he said back to him, Hasam be'ozardin. That's a case of ozardin, which is that the stalks are already hardened. They're not very flexible. And because they're hardened, they're more like a tree, either just in terms of categorically we would see it more tree-like because it's stiff, or because of the rabbinic concern that you'll come to pluck it off. Right? Something that's very flexible and pliable, right? There's less of a chance, there's almost like less of a chance that you'll pick a piece of a grass than there is that you'll pluck off it, that you'll snap off a branch. Because if something is harder, it snaps, it's easier to break and, maybe maybe you're more inclined to break it off. So he says, yeah, you know when the reeds are a problem? It's when they're hard and they're tree-like. But when they're soft, it's like grass, and that is not in the same category of not using a tree. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Let's see if it likes that answer. How do I know that there's a distinction between whether they are sort of hardened or not hardened? That only when they're hardened are they tree-like and therefore forbidden. Titania, we taught in the Brisa. Now this is less about the rabbinic concern that you'll break it off, and more about a formal category of you put things in a category, in a tree category or in a vegetable category. And we're going to look at the laws of kilayim of how you categorize it. Titania, we taught in the Brisa, hakanim va'atadim va'ahigim, which is basically like stalks, and atadim and higim are more like sort of like thorn bushes. Min ilan hein, they're all considered trees. The enam kilayim bekam, and it's not a problem planting them in a vineyard. You cannot mix vine with wheat, with grain, with vegetables, but you can actually plant trees alongside vines. So all of these bushes and these kanim, these reeds, are considered like trees. So here you see one way we categorize reeds is in the tree category. V'tanya idach, we taught in another brisa, hakanim, the same reeds, v'akidan v'arvanyan, and these other two things, which Rashi gives some word for. What does it say there in Steinsaltz? Are these things? Charlie, you looking?
Food crops.
Cassia?
Cassia,
bulrushes, cassia. This is the second list?
Second list, yeah.
Yeah.
Foxthorn is in the first list.
Okay, but anyway, this list is what? Bulrushes? Okay. Anyway, some type of thing, that's growing from the ground. All of these things are yericane, are considered in the vegetable category, or if you want like the grass and the vegetable category. Kilayim bekemen is a problem with the vines. So now we've got a problem. Are the reeds in the tree category or in the vegetable category? So because it's mentioned in both lists. Kashya Dadi, it's contradicting itself. Elosh Mamina, so you see the resolution is Kan Bo Zardim, Kan B'She'eno Zardim. It depends whether they're hardened or not. Shmamina, you see it. So basically, again, this is why you see sometimes it's very interesting, right? When does the Gemara get to the root of what the concern is, and when does it? And what root? I was really no pun intended. And when does it deal with just formal definitions? Trees versus non-trees. So the concern of using a tree on Shabbos is you'll come to break off a twig. Okay, so what's in the tree category? Maybe you want to put everything that has that concern that you'll break off a twig, and that should be your guiding principle. But the fact that the Gemara quotes a discussion in Kilayim, what does Kilayim have to do with using a tree on Shabbos? Nothing in terms of the reason. The only way you make the comparison is you say we're going to use once we've said don't use trees, now how is a tree defined? So it has nothing to do with what the motivating reason was behind it. We're going to look in other areas of halacha and use that definition of tree. Okay, and therefore we can go to Kilayim because we're going to take just the formal definition of tree, and we're also going to assume that formal definition will apply across categories. So that's always very interesting to see how often does the Torah have local definitions, or does it use general definitions, and is it a formalist type of an approach, or is it an approach that gets to the core reason? But here, this is the answer, his approach, that it is a formal approach, and soft reeds are in the vegetable category, not the tree category, and therefore you can use them on Shabbos. And the only problem, not pick them, but use them, sit on them. The only problem is the Mishnah was when it was a hardened reed and in the tree category. Yes, Michael.
Two questions. One is, okay, so even if it's soft, so we're not worried that maybe somehow will get uprooted? You know?
Yeah, so that's the point. Again, same type of issue, that the rabbis only made their takana with certain parameters.
No, I'm saying, but if, I understand that, but it should still be the same idea. In other words...
I understand, but so that's a good question. Why didn't they apply things like in a broader way? But we should be happy they didn't, in the sense that you could always say, well, like the Gemara before, what if this, what if this, what if that, what if that? So you have to give some certain limits to it, and some certain parameters to it.
We have all these very specific cases, like, I wanted to make my shvita, like the bottom of this pit, the top of the pit. Let's say I just said, just in the pit.
Right.
Is that okay? Or do I have to really be
like if you're not specific?
Yeah, like in the pit.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I thought the general question is, why would I anyway ever assume that the guy didn't want to make his shvita in the exact place where he put the Eruv? Why don't we? So maybe we do. It's a good question about what if he didn't have particular kavana, or what he had sort of generic kavana. I'll have to get back to that. Yeah, Charlie.
We don't seem to be consistent in whether we're willing to apply categorizations from one area of halakha to another.
Correct. We are not consistent. In every different sugya, you have to see whether one of the classic chakiras that Reb Chaim asks is this a din misuyam or a din klali? He doesn't use the phrase din klali, but he does use the phrase, I think, din misuyam, which basically means, is this category a local category or a universal category? And that really is different in every sugya. And the key tip-off is or the key evidence is, are they bringing definitions from other areas of halacha? And then you see that the Gemara is being completely formalist about it and assuming a sort of a universal category, and that's exactly what you see here. Yeah.
It seems a little more complicated in the sense that they're not talking about certain reeds which are hard and certain reeds which are soft. It's the same reed during the course of its growth, hardness.
Right. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. That is correct. Yes. So it's but that when this reed has hardened, how soft it is. Yeah, but you can see. I mean, some things are very obvious. Which stage they've gotten to, how pliable they are. But thank you. If I didn't make that clear, yes, the distinction here is not different types of reeds. It's whether the reed has hardened yet or not hardened yet. Okay, so now the Gemara just wraps this up. The kida mean yeriku. One of the things we mentioned that counted as a vegetable for kilayim purposes was kida, and that's actually in the Torah. So it's some type of aromatic, right? Spice or plant. How do they translate it? Cassia. Anybody? Okay. Does anybody know about that thing? Is it aromatic? Anybody have any? Okay. Anyway,
your coarse cinnamon bark.
Okay, cinnamon is interesting. Okay, so the Gemara says, is that really true that that's in the vegetable category? The Hatnan, we taught in the Mishnah, ein markivim pgam agabe kida levana. You don't what's it called? Not graft pgam, whatever that is. What do they say pgam is? Rue. Yeah. What? Rashi says ruda.
Yeah, there's a picture of it here.
Rue? Okay. You don't.
That was something you don't want to do. Like I rue the day.
All right. You don't graft.
Yeah, I have it going in my.
All right, good. You don't graft rue on this white kida. Because the rue is a vegetable and this white kida is in the tree category. So although you can have trees in your vineyard, you can't crossbreed trees with vegetables. So the Gemara says, so you see, again, this kida seems to be in the tree category. There's a difference between kida and white kida. Kida is in the vegetable category, white kida is in the tree category. Okay, so the things might change, variations on a certain type of a plant, or as we see even in a plant's life, from soft to hard, going to whether it is considered a vegetable or a tree. Actually, it's a good point, because given that, according to Rashi, it is the same thing in a later part in its life, it's pretty funny that the Mishnah should say that it's not a problem having it in the vineyard, since it would be a problem having it grow in the vineyard because it goes first through the soft stage before it gets to the hard stage. So what good does it do saying in the hard stage it's not a problem being in the vineyard if it could? Maybe it grew first, got to the hard stage, and now you want to plant the vines. That would be the scenario. Yeah, Charlie.
Applying the different stages of life of something that is alive, this is an issue for whether swordfish would be kosher or not.
It's an interesting question, right, about how do you look at things that have certain qualities at various stages, right. Okay, let's take a look at obviously, like your path point, I don't assume that the criteria are the same, but it's an analogous type of a discussion. Okay, let's look at the next Mishnah. Now we get to interesting. So that was issues about like Rishus Yachid, Rishus Rabim, using Mechubar. We actually have being on top of the pole as I mentioned, indicates that if it's even your this idea of Rashi before of not being one above 10 Tvachim and the other below this Mishnah seems very clearly not saying that they could be on top of a pole and you could be on the Rishus Rabim. Fine, so we've dealt with those cases. Those are mostly halachic issues about can you get to it for halachic reasons, and even on top of the pole, we said maybe you'd have to be able to shake the pole and have it fall down. What if you can't access it, not because of halachic reasons, but because of practical reasons? It's not physically accessible. So that's what this next Mishnah turns to, but we will see there might be halachic points here as well. Nosno b'migdal, you put it again in this migdal, which we are saying for argument's sake is something like a wardrobe, okay? V'avar ha'mafteach, and you lost the key. You locked it up into your chest, into the wardrobe, and you lost the key. Is it a good Eruv for Shabbos or not? Because you can't get to it, okay? Forget halacha, you can't get to it. Harei Eruv, it's good. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Eino Yodea Shamaftech Mimkomo, Eino Eruv. Eino Yodea Shamaftech Mimkomo. If you don't know that the key is where it's supposed to be, it's not good. Now, in the Mishnah, you might think that the whole... right.
It could be misplaced. You don't
right. Right. Well, we'll discuss in the Gemara what happens if you find it on Shabbos. Okay. So I'm serious. So anyway, but you could have said in the Mishnah that maybe the whole debate is maybe the Tanna Kama doesn't care that it's not physically accessible, as long as there's no halachic barrier. It's pretty funny. Like halacha creates a greater reality than the physical world. So if there's a halachic barrier, it's not considered accessible. If it's only a physical problem, that is accessible. That is makom echad, let's call it. Maybe it's more of a concept of being b'makom echad. So just because there's a physical problem doesn't make it in a different makom. Halachic sort of rishus yachid rishus ram does. But the Gemara is going to assume that even according to the Tanna Kama, you have to physically be able to access it, and is going to discuss how you can do that. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Yes, you have a question? Yeah.
This is your Erev Techum, right?
Yes.
So you've got this closet.
Out in the...
2,000... that's what we're talking about.
Yes, you're right. I don't exactly know how the scenario is, that it's out there in the middle of the field, this closet standing there. But you put it there because you didn't want somebody to steal your Eruv, and there you locked it up. Right.
So how do you carry the key?
Right. Oh, you've got that stuck with that metallic thing underneath the bottom of it. But I think that's why the Mishnah says bimkomo, that the maftech is in its place, because you're right. Even if you didn't lose the key, if you had no way to get the key there, it would be just as much of a problem. Yes. Yes.
What does that mean?
If you don't know that the key is where it's supposed to be, meaning if you don't know where the key is, it's a funny way of saying it, but he's basically saying if you don't know where the key is, then it's a problem. But he might be saying the bimkomo point because of what I just said, that maybe the key maybe has to be there, has to be accessible where that is. If the key is somewhere else and you can't carry the key to the closet, it's not going to do you any good either. Okay?
How about like it happens to us all the time where you know you put it away, but you forgot where you put it?
Right, so that's presumably not good. That's Eino Yodea. You don't know. Right, yeah. It's basically a way of saying if the key is lost, but it's funny that it's, he used so many words to say that.
So why is that different from the first
It's not. He's just saying it's not good. The Tanna Kama says it is good. Tanna Kama says Harei Eruv, and he says Eino Eruv. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the Gemara. V'amai, why is it good according to the Tanna Kama? Hu b'makom echad ve'eruv b'makom acher. It's considered a different place, even just if it's physically inaccessible. The same way halachically makes it a different place, physically inaccessible makes it a different place, even according to the Tanna Kama. So Rav and Shmuel, Rav and Shmuel both say, we're talking about that it's not made out of wood, it's made out of bricks. Okay, that should seem to make it harder. Rabbi Meir, the Amar Poches L'Chatchila. And according to Rabbi Meir, that says you could actually deconstruct something made out of bricks. It's not right, without plastered. It's just bricks that are laid on top of one another. And you actually can take it apart, and it's not considered soter on Shabbos, which is pretty amazing, because you would think that if it creates a real structure, and also like the weight of the bricks are pushing down the lower bricks, it's not like something that is like completely temporary, but actually there's a position of Rabbi Meir that if there's no binding agent and they're just piled, it's not considered soter to undo it on Shabbos.
So according to Rabbi Meir, I could deconstruct one of these stone walls in New England have been there for 400 years.
Right. I was actually thinking exactly of that because I don't remember what the context was, but I remember when we discussed a similar thing, when we were learning Shabbos, either it was you or Dov who said, that they have this way of doing it without plaster, that lasts for hundreds of years. Like it's real art of the way you fit the stones together, and they can exist for hundreds of years. Yeah, I know. So it's shocking. So let's take a look. But here's maybe why it says levanim. Levanim are bricks; they're not stones. So maybe actually stones would be different, because with stones, because of the different sizes, you can actually create like a more permanent type of a fit. Mm-hmm. Right? Bricks, they don't interlock. So maybe that's specifically
bricks.
Bricks.
Don't last as long. They
right.
crumble.
Well, that's true. But anyway, that's why maybe it's specifically bricks and not stones. So we'll see what he says. The Amar Poches Lechatchila V'Notel, that you can undo it and take from meaning in a case where a different case. What was the case? Now we taught in the Mishnah, Bayis Shemilu Peirot Satum. You have a house that is filled with vegetables, or fruit. It's your storehouse, and it's sealed. Okay, there's no, you threw away the key or whatever it is. It's you sealed the door. V'nifchat. Now let's say the wall crumbled or opened up. Notumi makam apchas. You can take the fruit from where there's a breach in the wall, and it's like not a muktzah concern, even though it was sealed in this house, but before Shabbos, or actually this is Yantiv, before Yantiv began. It's a Mishnah from Beitza. Rabbi Meir says, Poches v'notel lechatchila. You can even undo the wall lechatchila. So you see that according to Rabbi Meir, if it's just laid with bricks, you can actually take it apart. So our Mishnah would be talking that it's
some house,
right? Which is crazy, I know, it's wild. So our Mishnah would be talking that it's in a chest, it's in a wardrobe made out of laid bricks, and according to the Tanna Kama, it's considered to be accessible. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. V'amar Rav Nachman bar Adam or Shmuel ba'avira delivni. So 1 minute, but now v'hamar isn't a question. It's sometimes the v'ha is a statement. At least that's the way Rashi reads it. So, or maybe it's a question. How can you say it talks about any bricks or anything? Doesn't Rav Nachman say in the name of Shmuel ba'avira delivni? Now Rashi says that all avira delivni means is this thing which is like basically bricks that are just laid on top of one another, meaning without plaster. So the Gemara says, fine, Hachanami ba'avira delivni here too. That's what we mean. So just clarifying, it would be a case of bricks that are laid one on another, no plaster, and according to Rabbi Meir, you can actually undo it on Shabbos. So now the Gemara says, V'amar Rav Zera b'Yom Tov Amru. 1 minute, Rav Zera says it's only on Yantiv. Avalo b'Shabbos. Rav Meir wouldn't allow it on Shabbos, which is funny because there's no difference in terms of the malacha of soter by Shabbos and Yantiv. But for what maybe it has to do with Simchas Yantiv. Sometimes they allow more things to give you access to food on Yantiv. Particularly the Torah says, so even though you can't go ahead and build a house or destroy a house to get food, but Rabbi Meir, maybe it was a special Yantiv leniency. So Hachanami b'Yantiv. So the Gemara says, okay, Hachanam b'Yantiv. Our Mishnah is talking about Yantiv when it's in our Mishnah about the Eruv is a Yantiv case. So the Gemara says, Ihachi, 1 minute. That's true. Hainu diktaniala. We have a Breita exact on this mission that says the following: Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im be'ir avad eruvo eruv, im besada avad ein eruvo eruv. So this is exactly the question that you raised, getting the key to where it is. Okay, so he says if it's in the but here it's talking that it's lost. If it's lost in the city, then the key, then it's an eruv because you can get it to because it assumes now again the question is how do you get it out there because it's outside of the if it's in the city so there's a lot of houses and there's a lot of walled courtyards and the assumption is that wherever you find the key you can take it from a walled courtyard into the next walled courtyard, maybe travel up by the roofs, and there's you can travel very far through Rishus HaYachid. Now the question still is that, okay, but obviously your area is outside of the city limits. Mm-hmm. So it's very strange. It would have to assume, look, you could have structures outside of the city limits that are not considered houses. Nobody lives in them. They're like warehouses. So you would have to assume a scenario that you could sort of do it, or maybe there are walled fields, that you can get it out there or something. So the Gemara isn't fully explaining, but basically it means if your key is lost in the city, so in theory if you find it, you could somehow carry it through various Rishus HaYachids and get it to your Eruv, then it counts. That even though it's lost, this is Rabbi Eliezer, who's, I'm sorry, so 1 minute, let's take a look. Let's read this. So this Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah said, if you lost the key, it's not good. Here in the Breita, he explains the following. It depends. If it's lost in the city, then Eruv or Eruv, it'll be good. Because I could say maybe you'll find your key and you'll be able to get it to where you need it. However, if you lost it in the field, that even if you found your key, there would be no way you could get it to your Eruv, then ain't Eruv or Eruv. It's not good. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's not good. We find out in the Breita he's not so machmir. He doesn't say if it's lost, end of story. He says if it's lost in a place that even were you to find it, you couldn't get it, then it's to the Eruv, then it's no good. So now the Gemara says we can't be talking about Yantav, because here he's concerned about carrying the key. right? So obviously we're not talking about Yontif. So the Gemara says, V'i be Yontif, if the case was a Yontif, Mali Ir Mali Sada. What do I care whether it's a city or a field? So the Gemara says, Ha'chisuri Mechsuri, top of Lamed Hey, will just read this answer. It's missing some words, V'hachiktani, and this is how you have to read it. Nasno b'migdal v'nal b'fanav avram aftech. So you put it in the chest and you locked it and it was lost. Hareza eruv. That is good. That's the Tanakama. Now, why is it good? So the Gemara's answer, it's good. It's because it's made out of bricks and you can take apart the bricks on Shabbos. But b'madvar mamurim, when is it good? B'yantav. Because it's taking apart the bricks that Rabbi Meir allows he only allows taking apart the bricks on Yantiv. So when is that good? That's on Yantiv. Avol b'Shabbos, but if it was locked in the wardrobe on Shabbos, even if it was out of the bricks, ein eruv or eruv, it would not be good. Nimsa hamafteach, if the key was found, bein be'ir, bein besada, ein eruv or eruv, whether in the field or in the city, it would not be good. Now, why would it not be good if it was found in the city? If you can get it to where the eruv is. So I'll get back to that in a minute. But let's just finish how we're rereading the Braita. Rabbi Eliezer Omer be'ir eruv eruv. In the city, it is good because you can get it to where the eruv is. Besada ein eruv eruv, and in the field, it is not good. So this is actually now the Gemara goes from where did you lose it to where did you find it. Okay, so let me just take a step back because I think it's getting a little confusing. The first question is the Tanakhama says if it's locked up, it's good. Why is it good? You can't get to it. So the Gemara is going to give more answers to that question tomorrow, but today, yesterday in our time machine, tomorrow we'll have more answers to why is it good if it's locked up. But our answer today that it's good if it's locked up is it's in one of these. It's in a brick sort of construction where you can according to Rabbi Meir, you could undo it if it's Yontiv. So our case is talking about Yontiv and about laid bricks, and therefore it's good and not on Shabbos, and therefore it's considered accessible. That answers question number one: why is it good in the Mishnah? But now we turn to this other question about where is the key. So we had a Braita that Rabbi Eliezer said if the key is lost in the city, then actually it is okay. If it's lost in the field, it's no good. Which seems to be that the possibility of finding the key is enough to make it good, but only if you found the key, you could get it to the Eruv. Now that the Gemara is rereading the Mishnah, the Gemara is actually shifting a little bit. It's not saying where you lost the key. If it's still lost, maybe it's a problem, but you actually found the key. Okay? So you found the key. If you found it in the city versus the field, Rabbi Eliezer still makes this difference, city versus... I know. Let's just finish this point. Rabbi Eliezer makes a distinction again between city and the field. Is you find it in a place you could get it to, or not in a place you can't get it to. And the Chachamim say even if you find it in the city, it's no good. Why? Even if you find it in the city, it's no good. So here the idea is, and we've seen this before, this idea that you can carry from a roof to a courtyard, and from a courtyard to another roof, and from that to another certain walled-in things. Even though it's all Rishus Hayachids, those are considered, according to some opinions, different Rishuyot. All roofs are one things, all courtyards are one things, but you can't go from a roof to a courtyard or a courtyard to a roof. So the debate here then becomes a question of, even if you found it in the city, could you get it all the way out to where you needed to get it by traveling through different Rishus Hayachids, okay? So we'll continue tomorrow, but again, the upshot is that why is it considered accessible? It's a special case of bricks, according to Rabbi Meir on Yantiv, but then the more interesting question that we're now turning to is, I think more interesting, is the question about where was the key lost, where was it found, is the possibility of finding the key enough to say it's accessible, and this issue about how can you get it, can you get your key to the Eruv? So more on this tomorrow.
Who was it? Shimon thing, right? About gunnels,
right, exactly.